समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
Do you sometimes feel that you're no longer in control of events? That you're at the mercy of politicians and people who've been empowered by politicians, basically empowered to make our lives miserable? I feel that way these days. I feel as a member of the middle classes, I pay so much in tax and I get even less in return than I used to. I'll give you the best example, which is the air that I breathe. You would imagine that politicians couldn't really interfere with breathing air, right? That's a natural activity. Well, not unless you live in Delhi. In Delhi, it's not natural. The air in Delhi is so poisonous that most of us, if we go for chest x-rays, are told that there are problems that doctors can tell looking at our lungs immediately that we live in Delhi. Why is the air in Delhi so bad? Well, politicians will give you excuses. They'll say, it's a low-lying area, there's no water body nearby, etc., etc. All of this may well be true, but it was as true 30 years ago when I moved to Delhi and when there was no pollution problem. So what's made the difference? Part of it is population, but most of it is bad governance. Now, you'll be told by politicians in Delhi that there's nothing they can do. Big cities have that problem. It's not true. If you look at China, well, about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, in big cities, the air was poisoned. They took a stand, they cleaned it up. You could do exactly the same thing in Delhi. I mean, there are many people who've made suggestions. In ThePrint, Amitabh Dubey wrote an article suggesting measures. Others have suggested measures, but nothing ever happens. Why doesn't it happen? Part of it is, of course, stupidity. The AQI in Delhi these days is about 4 times the IQ of the average Delhi minister. But much of it is just venality and greed. They have something called GRAP, which is supposed to come into effect when pollution levels cross a certain limit, but it's not really GRAP, it's crap. Because usually they don't enforce it, they find reasons not to enforce it, they rig the pollution levels, they make excuses. Because why? Well, because GRAP would mean that transporters are affected, builders are affected, people who pay off politicians are affected. And of course, they'll never do that, right? Because it's much more important for them to keep their shops running than it is to worry about the air that its citizens breathe. That's how bad things are in Delhi. It's very sad because there was a time when I used to look forward to the winter in Delhi, to the flowering trees, to the wide roads. All that has been destroyed. It's been destroyed essentially because A, politicians allowed all kinds of illegal development, and B, even when you tell them how bad things are, they refuse to do anything about it. So you say to yourself, let me get out, let me go away from Delhi. Not that simple. I don't want to go back to the IndiGo crisis, which we talked about last week. But what was that about? Yes, of course, it was partly about IndiGo and them not hiring enough pilots, but it was about more than that. IndiGo controls 65% of our capacity. I can't think of very many countries where a private carrier is allowed to have such a huge share of the market. It can only happen with the connivance of politicians. Everywhere else, people want competition. In India, politicians have helped nearly every other airline go out of business except for Air India, and we'll see how that goes. Because you have this kind of duopoly where two airlines dominate the skies, and Indigo is twice as large as Air India, everything ultimately comes down to Indigo. And Indigo doesn't listen. because it knows it can get away with what it wants. It'll get away this time too. You watch and see. Have you heard a single politician say things like, pay compensation, you've inconvenienced so many people, maybe we should look at how you got this huge market share, maybe we should find ways of encouraging new airlines? You won't hear that, because they drove Kingfisher out of business, they drove Jet Airways out of business, they drove Go Air out of business. They only want to encourage a certain lopsided development that benefits them. Who loses that? You do, I do, both of us do. So you have a situation where, because of politicians, you can't breathe the air, you can't even leave. And outside of Delhi, in the rest of India, it's not much better. If you look at Goa, I've lost count of the number of times when people said that Goa is being destroyed as a destination, that the venality of politicians and the corruption is such that development is unplanned. You can do what you like if you're willing to pay. You can run a taxi mafia, you can do illegal constructions, you can open restaurants anywhere. We've been saying this for God knows how long, but nobody listens because politicians are making money. Well, many people paid the price. At least 20 people, probably more, died in a fire at a sleazy nightclub. They died because the nightclub had not implemented fire precautions. There was only one narrow passageway leading out. There should have been more than one passageway. There should have been fire escapes. But no, nobody bothered. Why not? Well, because clearly everybody was on the take. Human life is cheap when politicians can make money. These are just 3 examples picked at random from different cities, not just from Delhi. But what does it tell us? It tells us that ultimately we are the biggest losers. You know how much tax you pay. I know how much tax I pay. What do we pay these taxes for? We get 0 services. And now not only do we get 0 services, they're actually poisoning our air, building fire traps, stopping us from traveling, allowing monopolies and oligopolies to grow. That's the situation we're in. Will it change? I hope so, but I'm pessimistic. I've seen things deteriorate, and sometimes I say to myself, was it always this bad? Yes, there was corruption. Yes, politicians have never been great guys. But no, it was never this bad. You never felt as a citizen that you had no control over anything, including the air that you breathe. That makes me sad. But you know what makes me sadder? What makes me sadder is that while you probably agree with me and we'll all complain, come the election, when most people go to the voting booth, this will be forgotten. Other issues will dominate things. This is a country where in the middle of all this crisis, Parliament can have a 10-hour debate on a song and ignore everything else. We'll go back to those kind of emotional issues. We'll go back to swaying votes on the basis of sentiment and hatred. These issues will be forgotten, and these same politicians of every party, I don't just mean the BJP, the Congress, AAP, everybody's had a role, but these same politicians will get elected again, and we're back to square one, or maybe square minus one, because it's going to get worse.